Route 66 is a graveyard of dreams, but I didn't know that when I stuck my thumb out in the Arizona heat. I was 22, chasing the horizon, and looking for a story to tell. 2 years later, I found my story in a windowless cabin buried so deep in the pines that even the sunlight felt like a trespasser. This isn't a story about how I was kidnapped. It's a story about how I had to outlive a monster who didn't even have the decency to stay alive long enough for me to kill him. The heat was a physical weight, a thick, shimmering blanket that pressed against my skin as I stood on the shoulder of Route 66. I remember the smell of sun-baked creosote and the way the wind felt like a hairdryer being held too close to my face. I was 22, freshly graduated from UCLA with a degree in sociology that I didn't know what to do with, and a backpack full of dreams about finding myself in the vastness of the American Southwest. My parents, back in the manicured suburbs of Connecticut, had begged me to fly, but I wanted the grit. I wanted the story. I wanted to feel the pulse of the country beneath my boots. I looked down at my hands. They were dusty, my fingernails already chipped from a week on the road. Every few minutes, a semi-truck would roar past, the vacuum of its wake nearly knocking me over, leaving behind a swirl of grit and the fading scent of diesel. I wasn't scared. That was my first mistake, the arrogance of youth. I believed that because I was a good person, the world would mirror that goodness back to me. I had a map, a half-empty bottle of lukewarm water, and a thumb held high, signaling to the horizon that I was ready for whatever came next. When I saw the rusted black pickup truck slowing down, my heart didn't sink. It leaped. I watched the brake lights glow like two angry red eyes in the midday glare. The truck pulled onto the gravel shoulder about 50 yards ahead, kicking up a cloud of white dust that hung in the stagnant air. I hitched my pack higher on my shoulders and ran toward it, my boots crunching rhythmically on the stones. I thought I was running toward a ride to Flagstaff. In reality, I was running toward the end of Maya Grayson. The driver leaned across the bench seat and pushed the door open. The interior smelled of stale tobacco and old fast food wrappers, but more importantly, it was cool. The air conditioning was humming, a mechanical sanctuary from the Arizona furnace. The man behind the wheel didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone's uncle, a bit weathered, wearing a grease-stained John Deere cap and a flannel shirt despite the heat. He had light blue eyes that seemed a bit watery, and he gave me a small, tired smile. "Heading to Flagstaff?" he asked. His voice was scratchy, like sandpaper on wood. "Yes, sir," I said, sliding into the seat and pulling the heavy door shut. The click of the latch sounded so final, though I didn't know it then. "Thank you so much. I've been out there for 3 hours." "No problem, kid. It's a long stretch of nothing out here. Name's Silas." I told him my name. I told him about my graduation, about my plan to see the Grand Canyon, about how much I loved the desert. I talked because I was relieved, and I talked because I wanted to be polite. He just nodded, his hands, large, calloused, and scarred, steady on the steering wheel. We drove for maybe 20 minutes, the highway stretching out like a gray ribbon toward the mountains. I started to feel sleepy, the vibration of the road and the cool air lulling me into a false sense of security. Then, he missed the turnoff for the main interstate. "Wait, I think the exit was back there," I said, sitting up straighter. I looked at the GPS on my phone, but the signal was flickering, showing only a blue in a sea of gray. "Shortcut," he muttered. His voice had changed. The scratchiness was still there, but the kindness had evaporated. It was flat, cold. He veered the truck onto a narrow logging road, the tires screaming as they transitioned from asphalt to jagged dirt. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw the predator behind the mask. He wasn't looking at the road anymore. He was looking at me with a terrifying, hungry intensity. "I think I'll just get out here," I said, my voice trembling. I reached for the door handle, but he was faster. One of those massive, scarred hands shot out and gripped my hair, slamming my head against the side window. White stars exploded in my vision. I tried to scream, to fight, to claw at his eyes, but he hit me again, a heavy, brutal blow to the temple with something hard and metallic. The last thing I remember from the world of the living was the sight of a hawk circling high above in the blue sky, free and distant, as the darkness rushed in to claim me. When I woke up, the world was gray. It wasn't the gray of a cloudy day, but the gray of windowless concrete and unpainted wood. My head throbbed with a rhythmic, stabbing pain that made me want to vomit. I tried to move my arms, but they felt like lead. I was lying on a thin, stained mattress on a floor that felt like ice. I looked around the room, my eyes straining to adjust to the dim light of a single, flickering bulb hanging from a wire in the ceiling. The walls were thick timber, the gaps filled with dried mud and insulation. There was no window, only a tiny, rectangular slit high up near the ceiling, barely wide enough for a bird to pass through. The air was heavy, smelling of mildew, pine, and my own fear. The door, a heavy, reinforced slab of oak with a steel bar across it, creaked open. Silas walked in. He wasn't wearing the cap anymore, and his balding head made him look older, more like a vulture. He carried a plastic tray with a bowl of something that looked like gray mush and a cup of water. He set it on the floor and stood over me, his shadow stretching across the room like a shroud. "Where am I?" I whispered, my throat feeling like it was filled with broken glass. "You're in the woods," he said. "No city, no state, no name. Just the woods. Please, my parents, they have money. Just let me go. I won't tell anyone. I promise." He laughed then, a dry, hacking sound that chilled my blood more than the cold floor. "Maya, nobody knows you're here. Nobody is looking this deep. You're a ghost now, and ghosts don't go home." He stayed for a long time that first night. He explained the rules in a voice that was eerily calm. He told me that if I screamed, no one would hear me but the wolves. If I tried to run, the forest would swallow me whole before I reached a road. He told me that my life was now entirely in his hands. He could feed me, or he could let me starve. He could keep me warm, or he could let me freeze. That night, he took the first of many things from me. He broke my body, but he was trying to break my mind, too. As I lay there in the dark after he left, listening to the heavy bolt slide into place outside, I realized with a crushing horror that I didn't know where I was. I didn't know if I was in Arizona, Utah, or Oregon. I was nowhere. I was a secret kept by a madman in a forest that didn't care if I lived or died. The months turned into a year, and the year turned into 2. Time didn't move in hours or days anymore. It moved in cycles of pain and hunger. I learned the language of the house, the way the floorboards groaned when he was angry, the specific clink of his keys that meant he was going to be gone for a while, the heavy silence that preceded his worst moods. He used me. He used me for chores, making me scrub the floors of the cabin until my knees bled, making me mend his clothes with trembling fingers. He used me to satisfy the dark, twisted hungers that lived inside him. He would hit me for no reason, a backhand across the face because the soup was too cold, a kick to the ribs because I looked at him with too much hatred in my eyes. But I did hate him. That hatred was the only thing I had left. It was a small, flickering flame in the center of my soul that I guarded with everything I had. While he was breaking my spirit, I was busy memorizing him. I knew the exact way his pulse jumped in his neck when he was tired. I knew that he drank heavily, the smell of cheap bourbon seeping out of his pores. I knew that he was a man of habit, driven by a routine of drugs and isolation. I started to lose my words. When you don't talk to anyone but your captor for 2 years, your own voice starts to sound like a stranger's. I would whisper my mother's name to the walls just to remember how the syllables felt. "Elena, Elena." I would describe my bedroom at home to the spiders in the corner, the blue curtains, the shelf of books, the way the light hit the oak desk in the afternoon. I was terrified that if I forgot where I came from, I would truly become the ghost he said I was. He would leave for days at a time. He told me he was going to get supplies, but I knew he was going to satisfy his addictions. He would come back smelling of chemicals and sweat, his eyes pinned and glassy. Those were the most dangerous times. In his drug-fueled highs, he was unpredictable. He would talk to me as if we were a couple, telling me about his childhood, about how the world had done him wrong, about how he had built this place to escape them. Then, in a heartbeat, he would turn, his face twisting into a mask of rage, accusing me of plotting against him. The room became my entire world. I knew every knot in the wood. I knew that at 2 p.m., a single ray of sunlight would hit the far corner of the mattress for exactly 10 minutes. I would crawl into that light, letting it warm my skin, pretending I was on a beach, pretending I was anywhere but here. I became a master of dissociation. I would leave my body and float near the ceiling, watching the broken girl on the bed, feeling sorry for her, but unable to help. I waited for a chance to kill him. I looked for anything, a loose nail, a heavy stone, a piece of glass. But he was careful. He never left anything behind. He kept me weak, feeding me just enough to prevent my heart from stopping, but not enough to give me the strength to fight back. I was a prisoner of my own biology, my muscles wasting away until I was nothing but skin and bone, a shadow of the girl who had stood on the highway with her thumb in the air. Then came the day the world stopped. He had been gone for a few hours, or maybe it was a day. I couldn't tell anymore. He had locked the heavy steel-reinforced door to my room, his boots thudding across the cabin floor and out to the truck. I heard the engine groan to life, the familiar rattle of the muffler fading into the distance. I waited for the return. I waited for the sound of the truck coming back up the long, hidden trail. But the evening turned to night, and the night turned to a cold, gray dawn, and the silence remained. By the second day, a new kind of fear set in. It wasn't the fear of him. It was the fear of the absence of him. If he didn't come back, I was trapped in a box. The door was solid oak and steel. There were no windows. I had no tools. I had a small jug of water and half a loaf of stale bread. By the third day, the water was gone. The hunger was a dull ache, but the thirst was a monster. It felt like my throat was closing, like my tongue had turned into a piece of dry leather. I pounded on the door, my weakened fists making a pathetic, hollow sound. I screamed until my voice broke, until all that came out was a dry, wheezing hiss. Please, I croaked to the empty cabin. Someone, Silas. I would have welcomed him then. I would have welcomed the man who hurt me just to have a glass of water. That is the ultimate cruelty of captivity, the way it makes you crave the hand that hits you because it's the only hand that feeds you. Days passed. I think it was 5, maybe 6. I lost consciousness frequently. I would wake up in the dark, disoriented, thinking I was back in California, only to feel the cold concrete beneath me and remember. I was dying. I could feel my organs slowing down, my breath becoming shallow. I lay on the mattress, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows of the trees outside play through the tiny slit in the wall. I thought about my parents. I wondered if they had had a funeral for me. I wondered if they still looked at my pictures and cried, or if the pain had turned into a dull, permanent ache. I felt a profound sadness that they would never know what happened to me. I would just be another missing poster on a gas station wall, fading under the sun until I was unrecognizable. I was ready to go. I closed my eyes and let the darkness wash over me, hoping that whatever came next was better than the last 2 years. I prayed for the first time in a long time, not for rescue, but for an end. The silence of the cabin was so thick it felt like it had weight, pressing down on my chest until every breath was a labored struggle. I was drifting, my mind untethered from my body, wandering through fever dreams of cold mountain streams and the sound of my mother calling me for dinner. I didn't hear the crunch of gravel at first. I didn't hear the muffled voices or the snapping of dry twigs. To me, the world had already ended. I was just waiting for my heart to get the memo. Outside, the air was crisp, oblivious to the stagnant rot inside my prison. A group of 4 graduate students, kids not much older than I had been when I was taken, were pushing through the dense undergrowth of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. They were mapping fungal networks, lost in their own world of data points and soil samples. They had spent 3 days trekking through territory that wasn't on any updated tourist map, guided only by the whispers of old logging trails. When they broke through the final line of Douglas firs, they saw it. The cabin looked like a scab on the face of the forest. It was an ugly, windowless thing, built with a desperate kind of privacy. But what stopped them cold wasn't the house. It was the truck. The black pickup was parked crookedly near the gate, its hood dusted with a season's worth of pollen and dead leaves.
Hey.
Anyone home? One of the boys, a tall kid named Tyler, called out. His voice echoed, thin and lonely against the trees. There was no answer, only the wind whistling through the rusted wheel wells of the truck. The group walked closer, their curiosity warily shifting into a primal kind of dread. As they reached the driver's side window, the girl in the lead, Sarah, suddenly doubled over, clutching her stomach. The smell hit them like a physical blow, a sweet, cloying stench of advanced decomposition that the mountain air couldn't mask anymore. Tyler shielded his nose with his shirt and peered through the grime-streaked glass. He jumped back, a strangled cry escaping his throat. Inside, slumped over the steering wheel, was Silas. His head was tilted back at an unnatural angle, his jaw dropped open, as if he were still trying to catch a breath that had been denied to him weeks ago. His skin was a mottled, bruised purple, and the flies had long since claimed what was left of his face. On the passenger seat lay a scattering of blue pills and a syringe, the silent witnesses to his final, lonely exit. The students didn't stay to investigate. They ran. They scrambled back to the ridge where their satellite phone could catch a sliver of a signal. Their voices were frantic, breaking as they told the 911 operator about the dead man in the middle of nowhere. They thought they were reporting a tragedy of a lonely addict. They had no idea they were standing on the roof of a living grave. I woke to a sound that shouldn't have existed. It was a mechanical wail, a siren. It started low, a mournful hum in the distance, growing louder until it was a screaming banshee that tore through the fabric of my silence. I thought it was another hallucination, another trick my dying brain was playing to keep itself entertained. Then came the voices. Real, booming, masculine voices. State police. Is anyone inside? The cabin door was kicked open with a thunderous crash that vibrated through the floorboards. I tried to sit up, but my arms gave way, and I collapsed back onto the thin mattress. I tried to call out, but my throat was a desert. All I could manage was a pathetic, dry click. I heard them moving through the main room. I heard them swearing as they took in the filth and the madness of Silas's living quarters. Then, the heavy footsteps stopped right outside my door. I heard the metallic rattle of the bar being lifted. When the door swung open, the light was an explosion. It felt like someone had pressed 2 burning coals into my eye sockets. I shrieked, a sound that was more animal than human, and tried to crawl into the darkest corner of the room, shielding my face with my skeletal hands. Jesus Christ, I heard someone whisper, "We have a live one. Medic, get the kid in here now." I felt hands on me, not his hands. These were gloved, careful, and strangely warm. I fought them at first, my mind still convinced that Silas had come back with friends to finish what he started. I bit, I scratched with my jagged nails, until a soft, steady voice started to penetrate the static in my head. "It's okay, Maya. We know who you are. You're safe. We've got you." Safe. The word felt heavy and foreign. They lifted me onto a stretcher, my body feeling as light as a handful of dry leaves. As they carried me through the cabin, I saw the sunlight streaming through the front door. It was so green outside, so impossibly, vibrantly green. As the paramedics wheeled me past the truck toward the clearing where the helicopter was waiting, I saw it, the black pickup, and inside, the silhouette of the man who had stolen 2 years of my life. "Wait," I croaked, my hand feebly catching the sleeve of the paramedic. "Is he?" "He's gone, honey," the woman said, her eyes full of a pity that made me want to scream. "He can't hurt you anymore. He's been dead for nearly 2 weeks." I stared at the truck as they pushed me past. I looked at the slumped figure of my tormentor, and a cold, sharp blade of fury sliced through my relief. The hospital was a blur of white tiles, beeping monitors, and the constant, intrusive presence of nurses. They poked and prodded me, marveling at how I was still alive. They talked about organ failure and severe malnutrition and psychological trauma as if I weren't sitting right there, listening to them dissect the ruins of my life. A week later, a detective named Miller sat by my bed. He was a kind-looking man with tired eyes, and he held a file that contained the ending of my story. The toxicology report came back. Maya, he said softly. Silas, real name Leonard Vance, died of a massive fentanyl overdose. It looks like he got a bad batch, or maybe he just took too much that he died within minutes of getting into that truck. He never even got the key in the ignition. I gripped the hospital bedsheets until my knuckles turned white. So that's it? He just went to sleep? In a manner of speaking, yes. I felt a scream building in my throat, not of fear, but of an ancient, boiling rage. He had died in a drug-induced haze, probably feeling nothing but a warm, heavy darkness. He didn't suffer. He didn't starve. He didn't spend 2 years wondering if today was the day someone would finally hear him scream. He didn't have to live with the memory of what he had done. He had escaped. I wanted to kill him. I whispered, the words coming out sharp and jagged. Every night for 700 days, I planned it. I knew exactly where I would hit him. I knew how I would watch the light leave his eyes. I wanted him to see me, to see that he hadn't broken me before I ended him. The detective didn't know what to say. He expected me to be happy that the monster was dead. But I wasn't happy. I felt cheated. I had been robbed of my life, and now I had been robbed of my revenge. Silas had taken everything from me, including the chance to be the one who stopped him. I looked out the hospital window at the city skyline. People were walking, driving, living their lives as if the world hadn't stopped for 2 years. I was back, but I wasn't the same. I was a survivor, yes, but I was also a vessel for a hatred that had no place to go. I leaned back against the pillows, closing my eyes. I could still smell the pine and the damp earth of the cabin. I knew that for the rest of my life, I would be looking for him in every shadow, in every rusted truck, in every quiet stretch of highway. He was dead, but in the dark, silent corners of my mind, we were still in that room. And in that room, the story never ends. I'm ready to keep going. Should we explore the aftermath of her return home and her struggle with the ghost of Silas in her daily life? Leaving that hospital felt like stepping onto a different planet. My parents had flown in from Connecticut the moment they got the call, but when they walked into my room, there was a split second, a heartbeat of hesitation, where they didn't recognize me. I wasn't the vibrant, sun-kissed girl who had left for a road trip. I was a hollowed-out version of myself, my skin the color of old parchment and my eyes darting toward the corners of the room every time a nurse pushed a cart past the door. The flight back home was a nightmare. Being trapped in the pressurized tube of an airplane cabin, surrounded by strangers, made my skin crawl. I sat between my mother and father, their hands gripping mine so tight it bruised, but I felt miles away. I looked out the window at the clouds and thought about the forest. Somewhere down there, under the thick green canopy of the Pacific Northwest, was a small, windowless shack that still held my scent and my blood. It felt like a part of me was still trapped there, waiting for a man who was rotting in a morgue. When we pulled into our driveway in Greenwich, the neighborhood looked exactly the same. The lawns were perfectly manicured, the sprinklers were rhythmic, and the neighbors were peeking through their curtains. It was so normal it made me want to scream. I walked into my old bedroom, and it was a time capsule. My graduation gown was still hanging on the back of the door. My books were exactly where I'd left them, but I couldn't stay in there. The silence of the house was too heavy, too much like the silence of the woods before the hunger set in. I spent the first few weeks sleeping on the floor of the living room. I couldn't handle the softness of a mattress. It felt like I was sinking into a trap. Every time my father closed the front door, the sound of the deadbolt sliding home sent a jolt of electricity through my spine. I would jump up, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced for a fleeting, terrifying second that Silas was standing behind me with a heavy branch or a roll of duct tape. The nightmares were the worst part. In my sleep, the timeline blurred. I would be back in the room, but the door wouldn't be locked. I would walk out into the cabin, and Silas would be sitting at the table, his back to me. In the dream, I would pick up the heavy iron skillet from the stove and bring it down on his head, over and over again, until my arms ached and the floor was slick. But no matter how many times I killed him in my head, I would wake up to the news that he had died in his truck, peaceful and high. The rage was a physical thing, a hot coal sitting in my gut. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Eris, who specialized in captive trauma. She wanted me to talk about processing and forgiveness, but those words felt like insults. I don't want to forgive him, I told her during our third session, my voice shaking.
He took 2 years of my life.
He didn't just take my time. He took my capacity to feel safe. He took my ability to trust the sun. And then he had the audacity to die before I could look him in the eye and tell him I survived. You feel like he won, Dr. Eris said, her voice soft and clinical. He did win, I snapped. He's at peace. I'm the one who has to wake up every morning and remember the way he smelled. I'm the one who has to count the calories in every meal because I'm terrified the food will run out. He's dead, but I'm the one living in the prison he built. I started obsessing over his life. I spent hours on my laptop, digging through public records, trying to find out who Leonard Vance really was. I found out he had a sister in Ohio who hadn't spoken to him in 20 years. I found out he had been fired from a dozen jobs for unpredictable behavior. I even found an old mugshot from a DUI arrest 10 years ago. I stared at his face on the screen, tracing the lines of his jaw, trying to find the monster in the pixels. He looked so ordinary. That was the most terrifying part. He wasn't a demon from a movie. He was just a man who had decided one day that I belonged to him. A month after my return, Detective Miller called. He told me they were finishing the sweep of the property. They had found items belonging to other women. My heart stopped. I wasn't the only one. He invited me to come back to the station in Oregon if I felt up to it, to look at some photos and see if I recognized anything that might help them close other cold cases. My parents begged me not to go. They wanted me to move on, to enroll in grad school, to pretend the last 2 years were just a bad dream. But I knew I couldn't live my life until I faced that forest again. I needed to see the cabin with my own eyes, not through the haze of starvation and terror, but as a free woman. I flew back to Oregon alone. The air felt different this time, sharper, colder. Detective Miller met me at the airport. He looked even more tired than before. He drove me out toward the Gifford Pinchot forest, and as the trees began to crowd the road, I felt the old, familiar suffocating feeling crawl up my throat. We've cleared most of it out, Miller said as we turned onto the gravel logging road. The feds are going to raise the cabin next week. They want it gone. Good, I whispered. Burn it to the ground. When we arrived at the clearing, the yellow crime scene tape was fluttering in the breeze like mocking ribbons. The truck was gone, towed away to an impound lot, leaving only a dark, oil-stained patch on the dirt where he had died. I walked toward the cabin. It looked smaller than I remembered. Without Silas looming over it, it was just a pathetic, rotting shack. I walked inside. The smell was still there. The mildew, the stale tobacco, the lingering scent of my own fear. I walked to the back room, the heavy door standing wide open now. I stepped inside the 8x10 space that had been my entire universe for 2 years. I looked at the walls. I saw the scratches I had made near the floor, marking the months. I saw the stain on the mattress. And then I saw something I hadn't noticed when I was being rescued. In the corner, near the floorboards, Silas had carved a name. It wasn't mine. It was Sarah. Who is Sarah? I asked, my voice echoing in the small room. Miller stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the light. We think she was the girl before you, Maya. We found her ID buried under the floorboards in the main room. She disappeared from a rest stop in 2018. We never found her. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. I wasn't just his victim. I was his replacement. The rage I had been carrying suddenly shifted. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Sarah and whoever came before her, and whoever would have come after me if he hadn't taken those pills. I walked out of the room and into the main area of the cabin. On the table where he used to sit and eat while I watched through the cracks in the door, there was a small, dusty mirror. I picked it up and looked at myself. I saw the thinness of my face, the scar on my temple, the hardness in my eyes. But I also saw a survivor. I realized then that I didn't need to kill him. He was already a pathetic memory, a man so insignificant that his only legacy was a pile of stolen ID cards and a rotting shack. He had tried to turn me into a ghost, but he was the one who had vanished. Before I left, I asked Miller for a moment alone. I walked over to the spot where his truck had been, where his body had sat for weeks while I starved. I stood on that patch of dirt, and I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was jagged and loud, a release of all the pressure that had been building inside me. I laughed at the absurdity of it all. I laughed at the fact that he was dead because of his own stupidity, while I was standing here in the sunlight, breathing the fresh air he had tried to keep from me. "You lost," I whispered to the empty space. "You died in a cage of your own making, and I'm walking away." I didn't stay for the demolition. I didn't need to see the wood splinter or the fire roar. I headed back to the car, and for the first time since that day on Route 66, I didn't look at the horizon with fear. I went back to Connecticut, but I didn't stay in my bedroom. I moved to the city, got a job working with victim advocacy groups, and started using my voice to help others find theirs. The nightmares didn't stop, not entirely, but they changed. Silas wasn't the monster in the room anymore. He was just a shadow that dissolved when I turned on the light. I still have a scar on my temple, a permanent reminder of the day my life split in two. But when I look in the mirror now, I don't see the girl who was kidnapped. I see the woman who outlived her kidnapper. I see the woman who stayed alive when the world gave up on her. And in the end, that was the best revenge I could have ever taken. He took 2 years of my life, but I'm going to spend the next 60 making sure his name is forgotten while mine is heard. Please subscribe for more interesting stories. Thanks and goodbye.